As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
I think everybody asks for reassurance sometimes. That is normal. But reassurance becomes a problem when a child depends on it in order to kind of move forward in their day. And often what I find with the patients I see is they're asking for reassurance about things that parents actually don't even know the answer to, and they still need their reassurance. But parents will fall into this trap where they will answer anyway because they know that their child needs it for their anxiety.
That was Dr. Regine Galanti on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, everyone. It's Emily, and I'm here with Jill to introduce my interview with Dr. Regine Galanti about her new book, Parenting Anxious Kids, Understanding Anxiety in Children by Age and Stage. Childhood anxiety is such a hot topic right now in the media, like everywhere I am on the internet and parenting. So I was so glad we were able to have her on as an expert. So Jill, I'm really curious what you thought of the discussion.
Well, that was my first thought was, wow, this is so timely. And I think anyone who has kids, anyone who works with kids, anyone who wants kids will find this a really useful episode, especially because it's not just about parenting kids with anxiety disorders or problematic anxiety, which means really it's all kids, right? Because all humans experience some level of anxiety, and being able to differentiate between, what is quote unquote normal versus what is really something to be more concerned about. And I think you guys did an amazing job of talking through all of that and then talking about what to do with kids when they're feeling anxious and what not to do, which is, really important. And so there was one part toward the middle or the end where I had a question for you, Emily, as a parenting expert, that we agreed, we were chatting before our intro, might actually be useful to talk about in our intro because our listeners may end up having a similar question. And Regine is talking about the importance of spending one-on-one time with your kids, and she called it special time, and about using praise during those times. And I found myself a little thrown off because she gave an example of saying, "Oh, I love that you picked the blue Lego." And I had this moment of, wait a minute, I thought we weren't supposed to be praising our kids, but now we are supposed to be praising the kids. And so tell us, clarify for our listeners the way you clarified for me how we should and should not praise our kids.
Yes. And it reminds me, there's a video that I can't remember the source, but it's two moms just totally making fun of all of the contrary advice out there. And you just end up being like, well, we just can't talk. Can't talk to our kids.
We should just give up.
Yeah. Gonna get it wrong no matter what we do.
Right.
But the science on praise for kids, it is confusing because there was this huge movement in the 90s, actually, where self-esteem became this big focus. And it was like, oh, you can't have a child with low self-esteem, so you need to praise your child. And this was kind of the origin of everyone gets a trophy and that kind of approach. And then, of course, that was blown out of proportion by the media, what the science actually said. But over the years, it's become clear that general praise, like you're so smart or you're so good, that has an opposite effect on kids of having them feel like they have to keep working to have that praise.
To get your approval.
To get your approval and to be worthy. Whereas if you're using specific praise, oh, I love this picture you just drew. That is more targeting their self-esteem and helpful with boosting their motivation. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, it totally makes sense. And I think that's a really helpful distinction because I wasn't aware of that. So hopefully that will be useful for our listeners too, who might be frustrated by the seemingly opposite advice that we get all the time. The other thing that really stuck out to me that I love, and it's her magic button question, which when you listen to the episode, you'll hear what this magic button question is. But for me, as an ACT therapist, and Regine is more of a cognitive behavioral therapy therapist, and as an ACT therapist, what I really liked about this magic button question is what it does is it kind of changes the goals from I want my child to feel less anxious, which can be a hard target to hit, to what are the behaviors that you want to see change? And behaviors we can control. Feelings come and go, right? Feelings are elusive. Sometimes the more we try to control a feeling, the bigger it becomes. And so this magic button question really was a way to look at what are the behaviors that I would like to see look differently. And now I have something that I can actually work on and be successful at changing. So it wasn't the purpose that she says she asks the question, right? Which you'll hear when you listen to the episode. But I kind of loved that it has this dual sort of outcome.
Yeah. And I really just overall, this book is so empowering for parents because I think what it does is it gives very specific strategies. And we could only get into a few, of course, in our time together. But it helps us clarify. She talks a lot about parent goals and what are realistic, appropriate parenting goals with anxious kids. So there's guidance around how to create those goals. And then that is grounding, right, in the execution of the strategies on a daily basis in service of those goals. And one thing I did appreciate about our conversation is I hope you felt this way too. We were very humble about like, you don't have to do this perfectly all the time. And there's no way to do it perfectly all the time. And that's okay. It's more having the bigger picture aspiration of this is what we want to go for most of the time to help our child manage their anxiety.
Yeah. And I think that came across. And I love, and Emily, you always do a great job of like normalizing how hard parenting is and that we're never going to do it perfectly. And that, it's just never useful to shame parents and make them feel like everything that they're doing is somehow wrong or bad or inadequate in some way. And the other thing I wanted to add is this stuff is really hard. And sometimes just hearing a podcast or even reading a whole book may not be enough, support or knowledge for what your family needs. And so I wanted to bring up SPACE training. So SPACE is an acronym that stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And it's a program that parents can participate in where they can really get guidance and support in learning how to best parent anxious kids. And I think it includes a lot of the strategies you guys talked about in the episode, but then you have that, a therapist basically who's helping you to figure out how to execute that successfully.
Yes. And this very program has yielded some really promising research on how working with the parents themselves without even interacting with the anxious child actually resulted in positive outcomes. So it's very promising. I don't want to overstate.
Right. But it makes so much sense, right?
Yes.
Because parents are in children's lives all day, every day. Therapists see you for 45 minutes once a week, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes so much sense that getting the parents on board would be incredibly impactful. And for our listeners who are therapists, you can get trained to be a space therapist. So T, who's the therapist in my clinic at CSAM, she's space trained. So she sees anxious kids as well as does space training. And I know you had mentioned you're on a wait list to get the training yourself, right? Yeah, it's become popular because it's been so effective.
Yeah. So, okay, let's get to the episode. I just want to say that I loved this conversation in general because anxiety is everywhere right now. And whether it's a frequent emotion or behavior or an actual disorder, we're all managing anxiety at some level in our family units. And so I think this is a really important conversation, and hopefully listeners can listen and actually do something differently. That's how great all her concrete strategies were. Regine Galanti is a clinical psychologist and best-selling author with expertise in anxiety and OCD in kids and teens. Dr. Galanti started writing in order to share the tools she teaches families in therapy with a wider audience. She also enjoys speaking to parents, schools, and media outlets to share information about effective mental health information in children. She has been quoted in the New York Times, Washington Post, BuzzFeed, and other sources. When she's not working or writing, she lives in Long Island, New York, with her husband and 3 daughters. Regine, we both have 3 children. We're in the club.
It's a club.
It's a club. I am really excited to have you on today because you wrote a book about childhood anxiety, and that is such a hot topic. You know, I do a lot of parenting writing, so my echo chamber is everything that parents are talking about, and anxiety is one of those top topics right now. So I guess I wanted to start with what inspired you to write the book.
I think it's exactly what you just said. I work with parents all the time, and I think that the work I do is not rocket science. They think that it's accessible, and often by the time parents are coming in to my office, it is not too late, but they have a much harder job than if they knew what to do from the beginning. And often with our kids' physical health, we know, right? There are a million books out there about like, when is your kid supposed to crawl? When do they walk? How should I sleep train? And for the social emotional stuff, I don't think there's as much out there. So I really wanted to write a book that would just tell parents what I knew about child anxiety.
Great. And I'll say the title of the book is Parenting Anxious Kids, Understanding Anxiety in Children by Age and Stage. And you do a beautiful job of addressing all stages from toddlers even through emerging adulthood, which a lot of parenting books kind of leave them out, that 18 to 21 group. So this is really a book that can grow with parents and families as their kids age.
And honestly, that was the goal, right?
Right.
Even the teens, you'd expect that like you'd be able to find a lot on parenting a teen. I have a teen now, so I've been on the lookout for that kind of book. And a lot of books, it's almost like, oh, well, by the time your kid is 12, you've parented them enough and now your parenting job is over, I guess it's expected. So there's not as much out there as I want there to be.
Right. I actually hear from schools a lot that, so schools that are K through 12 have a really hard time finding speakers on parenting topics because people usually just focus on one section of childhood. So you are an appealing speaker. You can cover it all. Well, and I want to kind of start by touching on how the media at large talks about anxiety, because I think as clinicians, we know that how the media deals with anxiety doesn't capture the whole story because there's so much more nuance. And one thing I want to dispel is this idea that anxiety in itself is a bad thing to have. So let's start with kind of the benefits of anxiety, why our brains are wired to feel anxiety as an emotion, and how anxiety can be a good thing.
Right. I love that question because I think it's so true. One thing I've been talking a lot about is how for sadness, we have this this differential between sadness and depression. That sadness is the emotion and depression is the disorder.
Yep.
And for anxiety, we have the same word. Like there's no solution here. I just like to talk about the problem.
It's confusing though. You're right. That's a great point.
Right. Because how are you supposed to know if it's normal anxiety or problematic anxiety? And our words don't help and our words matter. But anxiety is super helpful. Anxiety is the reason why you don't walk into the street without looking and get hit by a car, or you get dressed for a job interview, or you put yourself together before you go on a date. It is protective. It makes us watch out for things that might be dangerous or might be threatening. And that is good because it helps us not get eaten by tigers. But the problems come in when we respond to everything like it's a tiger, right? When there's no danger, but we react as if there is danger.
Yes. And you actually use a metaphor that I loved, the fire alarm metaphor, where like everyone I'm sure has had that experience in their kitchen when they're cooking and they just happen to have something that's creating a little more smoke than usual. And so the smoke detector is going off and creating this sense of emergency when really everything is fine and there's no fire.
Right. And I think even to take that a step further, I think that as parents, sometimes you have that happen and your kid runs down from downstairs and they're like, oh my gosh, is something wrong? Right. And you have to be like, no, literally nothing. Sorry. I burnt something. There's too much oil in the pan and I forgot about it. Right. And that kind of gets into our role as parents to be like how you react to the thing that's either a crisis or not a crisis can influence the way our kids react. Because when you're so nonchalant about it, your kid's gonna be like, oh, okay, and go back to playing video games. Versus if you're like, oh, I know the noise was so scary. I'm sorry you got nervous.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you, like we said, you start with really young kids and go up to older, but those, especially those toddlers, those really young kids, they're always watching how we're reacting first because they're learning the world from a very fresh start and they really don't know what's dangerous. And you see those young kids looking at their parents for how to react, right?
Right. I think about like, there are these famous developmental psych studies on the, I think it's called the invisible cliff. This is going way back into the recesses of my grad school brain, but they put like a piece of glass over a drop off and put a toddler on one end and their parent on the other. And the idea is that they'd have the parents either making scared faces and then the kid was like, no way am I passing this fake, like this cliff that is not dangerous, but seems dangerous versus like happy, encouraging parents where the kid would climb over this perceived drop, even though it looked scary. Because the parents don't look nervous. So even from like that really young age, so this is pre-walking,
right.
Kids will follow their parents' lead in what they do, right? And how they react.
Right. Well, and, you know, in my writing, I get a lot into how the media has really capitalized on making parents scared and anxious themselves. And how this is really trickling down to parenting more anxious kids. Do you have thoughts on kind of just these cultural shifts maybe over the last 10, 20 years and how we're parenting and where anxiety plays a role?
Well, I think that there's a lot that we can't let our kids do because culture will judge us. It used to be that like, well, if I think about it, not to date myself, but when I was a kid, I had no cell phone. I was not accessible. If I walked to school, my parents didn't know where I was. I actually used to take the bus to school in 7th grade alone, like without a cell phone because they did not exist. So I'd walk to the bus stop. I'd get on a city bus. I'd take the city bus to school. I'd get off the city bus and go to school. My parents wouldn't know where I was from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night when I walked in from the bus stop. And I, I wouldn't even do that with my own kids now. And I'm attuned to this.
Right.
So the media does, I think, do a good job of scaring parents into independence is scary. Things can happen to your kids when you're not looking.
Yes, there's that message of there are bad things lurking around every corner and you need to always be in protection mode. That's how I feel it comes across.
Right.
But you bring up a good point around, okay, there's media, but then there's also just changes in our culture, and cell phones and constant connectivity is one of those changes.
Right. And it changes the dynamic, but I'm pretty sure if you look at the statistics, our day-to-day lives are safer now than they were.
Yes.
And we're more afraid and we let our kids do less.
Yeah. And so this really ties back into, there has been a rise in childhood anxiety. Do you have thoughts on, as an anxiety specialist yourself, what is behind those statistics? Is there a true significant increase? Are there things conflating those numbers? What are your thoughts on that?
So I tend to look at what the research tells me about this, but anecdotally, I know that even before COVID, it seemed like being a child anxiety specialist was a good career path. I'm not going out of business anytime soon. And then March 2020 hit, and everyone I know, just phones started ringing off the hook, but they actually haven't stopped. Right.
Yeah.
So it's 2024 and I'm still like bursting, wondering how I can hire more therapists to meet the need of the phone calls, which I guess as a business person is a great problem, but it probably is not a great reflection on society. But I know research wise, like we know the rates of child anxiety have been rising even before COVID. So it could be the media piece. It could be even the way we teach parents to parent, to be that hyper aware of everything our kids do.
Yeah.
Which from that angle, maybe it's not a great idea to give like, hey, this is what you should look for in your kids, to write a book about that. But hopefully it'll do more harm more good than harm. And people have asked me that actually. They've been like, well, what about the people who are looking for the anxiety in their kids? Do you think that this book would be helpful for them? And my goal is to normalize what is normal. And in the community I work in, it's much more people don't reach out for care even when they need care.
Right. That's the more common scenario. Yeah. Well, this is perfect. I really wanted us to get into when should parents worry about their children's worries, right? And you do a really nice job of giving examples of typical worries and fears at the different ages and stages that don't mean a child has an anxiety problem. Could you share some of those examples?
Sure. So I think when kids are very little, toddlers, we expect separation anxiety and stranger anxiety. So your kid doesn't want to talk to your friend that they've never met. That is normal. And if they cry when you drop them off at preschool, that is normal. It becomes not normal if it's January and they're still crying, but we'll get back to that. And then as kids age, their fears become more realistic. So early elementary school, storms, robbers, exaggerations of real things. So rain's not dangerous, but in a kid's brain, like if it's raining a lot, that could feel scary. So that would be expected. And then as they get a little bit older, they start worrying about academics and their grades and their friends.
Yeah.
And then tweens and teens become very anxious. Well, normal anxiety is about what are my friends thinking about me, social judgment and evaluation. And then as you move into emerging adulthood, it's all about independence. It's like, how do I get to be my adult self? Like, how do I pay a credit card bill? How do I make a doctor's appointment?
Right.
Those would be normal.
Right. The one that really stands out to me as I have children who are 14 and 12. My youngest is 9, but for the 12 and 14-year-old, we've had some really strong phases of they cannot be seen in public with their parents. And it's like this, I mean, they'll just like duck down in the car if they see someone walk by that they know. And I'm like, do you realize that they all have parents too? Like, this isn't a big secret to be seen with your parents, but it's so interesting, the strong reaction when that self-consciousness is really part of their developmental stage.
Right. Right. And you want to shake them, but also, like, at least I remember being there. Like, my mom was the most embarrassing person on the planet. And sometimes for good reason, because she's the mom that would call out the window and be like, "You're not wearing a helmet on your bike." And like, when she does that, I still sink into my chair. And then sometimes it's just because like, she's my mom, therefore she's embarrassing.
Right. Like, there's no way around it. Every parent is going to be embarrassing to their child at some point. Okay. So we talked about what's typical in terms of worries and fears at different stages. So when should parents actually start worrying? When does it cross into problematic anxiety? And I know this is a big question. You can just give highlights.
Well, is it impairing functioning? Is it getting in the way of your kid doing what they need to do? So what do kids need to do? They need to go to school, do their homework, hang out with friends, I don't know, maybe do chores. And if you are recognizing that your kid can't do that thing because their anxiety is so strong in the morning that every morning's a battle and you can't get them on the bus, and now you can't start your work day because of your child's anxiety, that would be a reason to seek help. And then the other metric I use is it getting in the way of functioning? And I specifically think about the child's functioning, but I also think about, is it getting in the way of the family's functioning too? Because if everybody in the family has to do specific things, eat specific foods in specific rooms for this kid to function, then that's not functioning. Because if everybody else was living their everyday lives and your kid is not functioning, that's a problem.
This is accommodation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So explain to listeners, because this is a really important concept in childhood anxiety and parenting. Explain what accommodation is, and then we'll talk about it a little more.
So accommodation is enabling. It's what am I doing for my anxious child that enables their anxiety to be maintained? As an anxiety therapist, I think a lot about short-term versus long-term consequences. So if I'm afraid of dogs and I cross the street when I see a dog, I will feel good short-term because I don't have to face my fear. But the next time I see a dog and it's unavoidable, my fear will go up to 100. And I won't know how to handle it. So short-term feels good, long-term feels bad. In anxiety therapy and using specifically exposure techniques, which are the evidence-based treatment for anxiety, what we want to do is flip that and actually make people more anxious short-term, typically, by saying, oh, we see a dog. We are going to go towards that dog. And that's going to feel terrible in the moment. But when chances are nothing happens, because typically nothing does if a dog is on a leash and walking down the street, then I am going to learn over time that dogs are maybe not as scary as I thought they are. Or even if I still think they're scary, I'll learn that I can handle that. So back to accommodation, when we enable a child to, let's say, not take the bus because they're anxious and drive them to school instead, it feels good short term because your child gets to avoid their anxiety, and you as the parent don't have to manage these hard emotions in your child, which brings out typically hard emotions in yourself.
Yes.
And that feels good for everybody until next week when you have a work meeting and you can't drive your child to school and they have no skills to handle this or get on the bus. So by accommodating them, by enabling them, by driving them to school because they felt anxious, you actually make the problem worse long term.
And I just want to say for listeners out there that are thinking, oh, I do this, I think we all do to some extent. I know I do. And there are certain times where we just aren't able to deal with a huge emotional outburst. And we have to kind of live our daily life as we have to. But it's looking at the bigger picture of how is this serving my child or not serving my child. So, for example, I think a lot of families struggle with meal times, and you get into this in your book as well, of dealing with anxiety around trying new foods and needing certain meals. And then how I think when we're having a really busy evening routine, it is just easier to make the different food than to really work with the child on facing the anxiety around the food that we're serving, which could result in a huge emotional outburst.
I think absolutely. And I'll add to that accommodation is not all bad. We all do it like in one-off situations. You don't have time. You do it anyway. But when it's a pervasive problem, then it becomes an issue. And also we have to decide where we want to use our parenting bandwidth. Mm-hmm. So if you want to say mealtime's the most important to me, I am going to help my kid eat a bigger variety of food. That is fine, but it comes at the expense of like focusing your parenting in other areas. Right. So you only have, let's say, 100% of parenting bandwidth, and you can't use it on all the things, even though we might like to. And then you see your friends doing something else or making, cute food with faces on it. And you're like, that sounds amazing. And then you remember that you have a full-time job and you can't. That's okay.
Right. No, that's great to really normalize it and validate that we can only do so much and we're not going to be able to do it all. And so it's really about prioritizing, I think coming back to what you were saying about impairments, right? Where is there actual interference in our child's life and functioning or our family life and functioning, where it's an ongoing problem that is prioritized. That needs to be prioritized because it will just help all of us live a better life rather than the one-off situations where it's just like, we just got to let this go. We got to let things go sometimes.
Right. Yeah. And it's not going to ruin your child to let certain things go.
Right. So I also want to talk about the other sneaky way that parents can inadvertently reinforce their child's anxiety. We talked about accommodation, but the other one is reassurance giving. So what is it and why is it a problem?
So I think everybody asks for reassurance sometimes, often, right? Do I look okay in this outfit? Did I sound okay on this podcast? Let's say that is normal, but reassurance becomes a problem when a child depends on it in order to kind of move forward in their day. So and often what I find with the patients I see is they're asking for reassurance about things that parents actually don't even know the answer to, and they still need the reassurance. So it's, did I study enough for this exam? Like, I don't know.
Right.
I know, like we'll see, I guess, but parents will fall into this trap where they will answer anyway because they know that their child needs it for their anxiety. So, are you sure? Right? Are you sure I studied this?
Yeah, it doesn't actually satisfy longer than a few seconds. And you have a whole reassurance cycle that I really liked, this visual of it, where it's a loop. It ends up being a loop.
Right. I think a lot of things in our line of work end up being this loop, right? You ask for reassurance. The kid feels good for 3.5 seconds.
Yeah.
Then that feeling that hit wears off and the kid's anxious again. So they ask another question. So you have to answer the other question. And now you're stuck in it forever and ever and ever. And the only way that your child's going to feel good is if they check with you first, which is fine, except you don't actually know the answer. Right. And they're not experiencing these normal levels of anxiety of like, I'm not sure, but I guess I have to put the book away and see how it goes and manage my emotion around not knowing.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's tolerating that uncertainty. I talk a lot with people in my practice about a big part of anxiety is difficulty with uncertainty. And unfortunately, much of life is very uncertain. And so it's learning how to cope with that uncertainty.
Right. And I think a lot of times parents also want to make that uncertainty somehow go away, or kids be just experts at just, so what if you don't know? But parents themselves struggle with this because people struggle with this. I don't like not knowing things. I like knowing things, but sometimes I'm not going to know things. And how do I manage that?
Right. So what are your suggestions for parents instead of giving the reassurance? How can we respond differently to interrupt that loop?
I always tell parents it's okay to give reassurance once.
Okay.
Because it could be that they're really not sure. And so unless there's a pattern, it's fine to give that reassurance once. And then if a child asks again, you can say something like, oh, I already answered that, and I know you can handle remembering my answer. Or I think you know the answer. And that's it, kind of, period.
Yeah. And another one I liked that you said was, I don't know. What do you think? And just putting it back to, I just don't know. And then you're modeling that uncertainty too, but you're calm about it.
Right. And kids hate this, by the way. If anybody thinks these are solutions to make your kid just magically be calm with uncertainty, then you should tell me what therapist is teaching you these magical skills. But as therapists, we say all the time that, like, sometimes you're just going to feel uncomfortable, and modeling that and being able to show kids like, no, I don't know the answer. I wish I did. It would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of quote unquote good parenting does not make our children happy in the moment. So it's keeping the bigger picture. So one thing you talk about are parenting goals. And I really wanted to pull out this question that I'm sure you use in your practice a lot. It's such a good one for listeners who are listening to this right now to pose to themselves. If a magic button made your child's anxiety completely disappear, how would your child's life be different? How would your life and your family's life be different, if at all? So what do you think this question does for people when you use this?
What I think it does is I think it reorients them towards what they want their parenting to look like. Because I think that often anxiety is getting in the way in these, like, very nefarious ways. So you're cutting your child's food in a certain way, or you're making sure that bedtime goes according to plan, or you're spending all this energy answering these questions to avoid a meltdown. And if your child wasn't reacting emotionally the way they were, you have these images of being a completely different parent. And what we want is what most parents want is you want your child's behavior to change. And then you get to be the parent you want. And as a behavior therapist, what I'm always focusing on is changing the order. So how do we become the parents we want to be? And then thereby helping our child feel the way they want to feel, or we want them to feel.
I think that's so important. That is really key. You know, and in therapy in general, I think a lot of clients get stuck on, this needs to change before I can do X. So I have to wait. And those are usually things outside of their control that then leaves them in a holding pattern. And that's so true in parenting anxious kids. It's like, if their behavior would change, things would be easier and calmer. But flipping it to, what can I do? So it's very empowering for parents to look at how I can start to do things differently to take the lead in the change.
I think that's exactly it. Sometimes you exercise and then you get in the mood to exercise.
Right. Exactly. It's a good parallel. So I want to get into the specific age groups, but first I wanted you to talk about some strategies that really span all of the age groups. And one thing I wanted to pull out was this idea of special time, and you include it, and it has a different sort of manifestation for each of the age groups. But could you just say generally what it is and why it's so key to parenting anxious kids?
Well, I honestly think it's probably just a good move in all of parenting. If we're going to look at things we know that are good foundations of good parenting, it's one-on-one time with your kid. Some version of that is in every protocol, every recommendation for good parenting. And it can start really young. Sometimes parents will be like, you want me to play with my 18-month-old? And I'm like, why not? Whatever they get out of it, they get out of it. Follow their lead. And then often what parents will say is, but I play with them all the time. When your kids are little, you play with them all the time. But one feature of special time that's a little bit different is following your child's lead while you play with them. So they're picking the game and you're kind of following along using specific skills from parent-child interaction therapy. But the general rule is 5 minutes of one-on-one time. And as a kid grows, they need a little bit more time and probably a little less skills besides for that basic of following their lead. But for young kids, I recommend using these 3 specific skills. So specific praise or labeled praise for the things they do. So general praise is great for every kid and makes every kid feel good. But being able to say things like, I love how you picked a blue Lego, even something really specific, helps orient them, but also helps orient you. I think of it in your brain of being more specific outside of play. So I sometimes think as a behavior therapist, I have like a nefarious agenda underneath this. So yeah, play with your kid, set the foundation, but also then if you're good at labeled praise, you can be good at labeled praise for your kid doing brave things that you wouldn't normally catch because you don't have the language, basically, because you haven't practiced it. So the more we practice these skills in special time, the more we can use them outside of special time. But so we have labeled praise. We have descriptions. It's when you comment on what a kid's doing. You're picking up 2 blocks. You're stacking them on top of each other. And you have reflections when you repeat what they say. So they say, I'm drawing a blue horse. And you say, yep, you're drawing a blue horse. I know it sounds awkward. It gets very natural very quickly and kids respond super positively to it. So
they do. I do it in my practice and it's amazing how they really love it. I mean, I don't think there's a time in their day where it ever happens besides those few minutes.
Right. That's the thing about special time. It's like we're telling our kids what to do all day long.
Right.
So giving them even a few minutes where it's like, you're in charge.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll find that like in play, parents are like, okay, we're going to build a house. We're going to do this. And having them back off from that is really nice.
Yeah. So what about with older kids? How could special time look?
I think probably that version can last some parents until they're like 8, 9, 10, depending on the kid. Parents typically think their kid is more mature than they are. They'll be like, oh, my kid would never play Legos. I know my middle child is 11. If I sit down and play Legos with her, it extends the use of the Legos. So she would never do it alone, but with me, now she's still game for playing. But as a kid gets older, so I would think, again, just one-on-one time, maybe instead of 5 minutes, we're talking more like 10 minutes. But I also am practical and I'm a parent myself and I know it's hard. So if you only have 5 minutes, that's okay. But thinking about just more older kid toys that can last over a little bit of time. So if you're both, let's say, puzzlers, having a spot where you leave out a 1,000-piece puzzle and you do it together 5 minutes a day, or scrapbooking or something a little bit more complicated, but planning in advance. Because again, parenting brain is, oh, it would be great if I did this with my 11-year-old and then I don't have the supplies and I don't have a plan and I never get around to it. And now it's a month from now and I still don't have the plan for it. So taking the time and putting things in the house and making a spot is very, I think, important. And one of the things I like to think about as special time is you really want to be collaborative. So watching a show together, even reading a book. I love reading, but like that is not special time because I don't get that one-on-one back and forth with my child that I'm looking for. But, and this might be controversial, video games can be special time because you're playing together.
And it's their expertise most of the time, right? I know.
Definitely not mine.
I have no idea what's going on, but they get so excited to share. It's their world. I think it's looking at with some older kids, where is their world that maybe you know very little about and they can teach you, right? They're taking the lead in that way of they're in charge. It's their knowledge base. So if it's video games, it's video games.
Right. Right. And this can even work with teens. Teens, it could be more conversational. Just go sitting on their bed. How was your day? Following their lead.
Yeah.
But if your teen is into something, like if you have a basketball kid and you can go outside and play, like I think that we know shared experiences is what bonds people together. So use that.
Yeah. Well, I know it's my oldest is 14, and this does take more than 5 or 10 minutes, but one of her favorite things to do is to just go to Starbucks or Target. And so you have the car ride and then the experience of being there and then the car ride back. And we have had some of our deepest talks on those car rides. So I think that's
a thing.
Those outings, but their choice of the outing, not following your errands that you have to do.
Right. My oldest is also a 14-year-old girl. And like we recently made a rule, like no AirPods in the car.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. I might steal that one.
Right. Because the same, it's like, I think there's also something about the fact that they don't have to face you. So it takes some of the pressure off them.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to pull out of what you were just talking about with special time is the use of specific praise. And with anxious kids specifically, using the term brave behaviors. And I love that framing as parents are working with kids on their anxiety to set goals around brave behaviors or giving them praise around that was a really brave behavior. So I just wanted to pull that out. You kind of slid it in there when you were describing things, but I think is an important strategy for parents. One thing I wanted to talk about, because I think it is really important, and then we'll get to the age groups, is the role of shame in anxiety. And that anxious kids, in my experience, can be more sensitive to experiencing shame. And so a parent may say something that they think is, well, you're being annoying right now. They just think, well, I'm just giving them feedback. I'm not saying they're an annoying person. But talk a little bit about how this works with anxiety in kids.
I think that shame is a really powerful emotion, and it is super overwhelming for adults and kids. So anxious kids, especially after the anxious moment has passed, know that they screwed up. They know it wouldn't have been the end of the world to go to the birthday party. In the moment, it felt like that. And now the moment has passed and they no longer feel it because emotions fade, but they have to deal with the consequences of that. And typically they don't have the skills.
Yeah.
So often I like to think about like, if you're not accommodating and you're providing that praise for the child's brave behaviors, and then a child still kind of makes a mistake, gives in to their anxiety, because sometimes we do that. You really want to help them avoid that shame cycle, which means letting it go and letting the consequence for their feeling be its own consequence, meaning they missed the birthday party. Okay, done.
Right. Like we don't need to keep talking about it. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Right. Like we can talk about what we can do differently next time. I like to think about making sure that it is outside of that, I guess, anxiety shame zone first. Mm-hmm. So giving it another day when everybody's calm and regulated to be able to be like, very matter of fact, stick to the facts. Like, I know yesterday this thing happened. You wanted to go to the mall with your friends. You didn't make it. What can we do differently next time?
Yeah. So really waiting. I think that's important for parents to hear. Like, you don't have to solve it that hour. Sometimes I think parents feel like they should do it right away. And that's not going to be very productive.
No, you really want to wait till everybody's calm. And I think it's our own emotions that drag us into commenting then. You can't do this right now. Don't you see how you're screwing up your life? Like, okay, like if anyone told you that, do you think it would really like motivate you? Well, I'm screwing up my life. Okay, I'll go fix it.
Yeah. We know from the science it doesn't work. Yet we tend to still go towards those negative voices, even our inner voices, right? I think we all have that experience. How can parents look for shame in behaviors? Like what are some signs that a child may be feeling shame? Because they're not going to say, I'm feeling shame right now.
Oh, I think it would be, I don't know what kind of, like how much emotional regulation someone would have to be able to say that.
Yeah.
But I personally am not there. So I think it comes out sometimes as other emotions, which is tricky. Like anger is a big one. Like if they are lashing out at siblings or you in a way that is uncharacteristic, that might be a sign of shame. Avoidance also, which is a common anxiety response, but can also be a shame thing. And it's more, how can I bring out my kid instead? How can I not avoid this for now, but create a situation where they can return, they can regulate, they can cope. But you don't want them disengaging when you see that. So it's more, how can I engage them? And if they're picking on their siblings, it doesn't mean letting that go, but it might mean, again, recognizing that shame is its own punishment. It feels terrible.
Yeah. There are times I've said to my kids, that must have felt really bad. It's sort of this like validating, like that feels so hard to have that outburst. And, you know, it's validating it. It's not that it's okay that you just wailed on your sister.
Right.
But they were out of control, you know, and it feels terrible. Any of us knows that feeling is awful when we lose control. And so I think maybe connecting emotionally with just the experience of not being in control of your emotions.
Right. I love using validating, especially as the kid gets older. I think it's such an important skill to be able to say, like, I know that was really hard for you. Like, and not adding the part of, and you shouldn't have done what you did.
Right. Because they know that. They already know. Yeah. Okay, let's finally get to the age groups. All right, so toddlers ages 1 to 3, you have a great acronym, HALT. So explain HALT and why it's helpful for this age.
So HALT is an acronym for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So it's a good way to say, is there something that is dysregulating my child right now that I have to deal with? So do they need food? Do they need a nap? Are they just like, I don't know, angry at their baby sibling who is taking too much of your attention? Or lonely, meaning are they, have they spent too much time just being ignored because you had a work meeting or something? And deal with those things first.
Yep, I think that's so helpful for that age group. HALT, it's easy to remember too. Okay, school age 6 to 10. What I think was really important here are the themes of perfectionism and problems with frustration tolerance that show up in this age group. So I see that in my therapy practice. I see it in my own kids. It's like those perfectionism threads especially start to become really apparent. And that can be such a huge trigger of avoidance behaviors or a child looking like they're not cooperating, but it's actually because they're so worried about making a mistake that they just refuse to do something. So what are some of your strategies for parents in this age group?
So I love playing frustration-inducing games with kids. These are like minute-to-win-it style games where like you're going to lose. Bouncing ping pong balls into egg crates, bouncing pencils with erasers into a mug or something, trying to stack Oreos on your forehead, creating time where you are not going to be perfect. I love using that strategy. Or even my 7-year-old has been struggling with frustration tolerance and losing board games. So we've been having board game night just to practice this, where if she loses, she gets like a small candy. And if she wins, she doesn't. So it's a way to get her, because she was quitting games. And I was like, nope, we don't do this. So, it's not long term.
Well, but it's shaping her experience of losing to be less negative, less aversive.
Right. And it's more fun than homework. just got to do homework, right? Like that message is not so appealing to kids. So being able to find more fun ways to shape frustration and modeling it is actually another really big skill, because we are great at being hypocrites about this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey kid, yep, sometimes in life you're not perfect. Sometimes you're not going to know what 2 + 5 is. But then our version of 2 + 5, we're like, oh my God, there's a typo in my work email. My boss is going to think I'm an idiot. I need to resend that. I'm going to leave family dinner right now to deal with this problem.
It's a great example. I also like some of your tips for how to talk about anxiety with this age group, kind of the and then what strategy, which I also use all the time in my therapy, but say a little bit more about that because I think it's really helpful for parents.
People think anxiety is, everybody knows exactly what they're anxious about. So if my kid is saying that they're anxious about school, they're anxious about school. And I think as anxiety therapists, we know that being anxious at school could take 7,000 million different forms.
Mm-hmm.
So helping a kid be more specific, so it's less Wizard of Oz, what's the man behind the curtain, and more like what are you actually afraid of? So what'll happen in school? I'll fail. And then what? And then, like, a lot of times we'll get stuck. I started too far down the equation of like, and then the teacher will be mad at me. And then what? Like, but kind of helping them process what the steps of the anxiety would look like, because often it helps them see it as more irrational. Like, oh, that actually doesn't make sense. The kid next to me fails all the time. The teacher still likes them. Okay, that's weird.
Or what I'm so scared of actually isn't that bad, once they break it down. And then I like the follow-up too of, and you have this in your book, the follow-up of, well, could you handle that?
Right.
That feared outcome. Like, what if, your teacher probably won't get mad at you. What if your teacher got a little mad at you? Could you handle it?
Oh, my teacher was mad at me last week and it was fine.
Yeah. Okay. So in middle school, the role of technology is significant in how it can feed anxiety. And we talked before about how even the existence of cell phones means that all of us are always available technically. And so this kind of can be part of that reassurance cycle of, needing to check in with us about every little thing during their day. For example, I know I get those like, mom, and I have to remind them I am not always available. I am also working. But it's an important consideration of like how that affects the experience of anxiety for this age group when they feel like they can always reach you. But in terms of working with anxious thoughts in this age group that could do a little more cognitively than the school age, you have some really great examples of coping thoughts. Can you share a couple?
So I think one thing to recognize for kids this age is that they can do the metacognitive work of like thinking about their thinking and recognizing, let's say, when they're trying to reach you, that what happens when they keep contacting you again and again and again, they get more and more anxious and the thoughts kind of fly. So giving them a way to figure out what they can tell themselves in that moment to reframe their experiences, something like knowing that anxiety is normal. So telling yourself maybe something like, this feeling won't last forever. So my mom's going to answer me eventually, probably. And and I can handle that. I can handle how I'm feeling right now is one that I guess a kid this age could use.
Yeah, it's building their confidence in how to manage the emotion. And I think big picture, we started with, we all have anxiety. It's an emotion, not necessarily a disorder. And the idea is building that confidence that when I feel anxious, I can manage it and I will be okay. And so that's what we're aiming for, big picture, with our parenting responses too.
Right. That I can cope with this, that I can do hard things.
Yeah.
Being able to tell yourself that is very different from hearing it from an adult figure.
Okay, so high school, older adolescents, they have much more sophisticated thinking now. Not much. Well, it's leaps and bounds from when they were 6 years old.
Right.
Right. So talk about kind of what you see as the triggers for anxiety in this age, and then kind of how we can best support them.
I think it's often social triggers and academic triggers.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about like getting ready for college and getting ready to do things. And those are really tricky, especially because they're not relying on us so much anymore. So our parenting goals are different. Instead of being able to use our own skills, it's more being able to push them to use their own skills. And often that means taking ourselves out of the equation, to help them start building towards independence and not picking up the slack. Parents hate this one. They hate this strategy so much. So, but it becomes, instead of like, oh, okay, like I can drop my kids' homework at school for them, even though they left it. This is a dead example I'm realizing now because all homework is submitted online. But that's the way it used to be. It's more like, oh, my kid forgot their lunch. That still happens.
Yep.
You can't.
Or my instrument. I've seen like band, they leave their instruments at home.
Right. Right. So not doing that and allowing your kid to experience the consequences at this age, because they are capable of learning, and that will help them set themselves up for that next phase of adulthood to have to remember their stuff because you won't be around.
Yeah. And when we're not living with them, allegedly, maybe, we'll get to emerging adulthood next, which is that whole phase of 18 to 21. This is, normatively the time of not living at home anymore, but more and more of this age group are still with their parents. And you talk about how anxiety plays out in this stage is a higher dependence on parents than is developmentally typical.
Right. So for emerging adults with a lot of anxiety, you're going to see kids who, let's say, don't learn how to drive, or are still living at home and commuting to college. There are reasons to commute to college outside of anxiety, but anxiety is a big one. Just kids, and I'm still calling them kids because I still think of them as kids, who aren't doing the things as their same age peers, not going on vacation alone or with their friends, or not being able to navigate handling money or making doctor's appointments. So our parenting goal, starting in teens and weaving through emerging adults, is to help our kids by forcing that independence, which means doing less. It's the enabling in younger kids, the lack of accommodation, but more on a grander scale of like, yep, you can, like, if I, like, maybe I will pay for this, but you have to do it all yourself.
Right. And you make a really good point. And I have worked with young adults like this, where they actually may not look anxious because they have found ways to accommodate themselves and stay really comfortable. And at the same time, like, the parents aren't expecting those independent behaviors of them. For example, I worked with someone who worked part-time. It was figuring out what to do with education. The parents weren't expecting any sort of finance, like helping pay the rent or buying groceries or any of that kind of important daily life skill of an adult.
Right. Right. And because you say, oh, well, it's my kid, how can I charge them rent?
Yes. Yeah.
But it's not about the rent. You can put it in an account to be given to them for their own rent when they move out.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But it's going to feel jerky. I think people forget that when your kid is anxious and it's making you anxious.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to do hard things to help your anxious kid do hard things.
Yep. Circling right back to the parent. Understanding our own anxiety and our experience and how we're responding emotionally is kind of at the heart of all of this, actually. So, well, Regine, thank you so much for sharing your much needed wisdom with us today. I know that the parents and anyone interacting with kids out there will really benefit from having more tools in their toolbox. And that's for either having an anxious child, I have an anxious child, or even just noticing there's some anxious behaviors here or there that maybe we just kind of want to nip in the bud. So thank you so much for coming on Psychologists Off the Clock. Where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram at Regine Galanti, or my practice is Long Island Behavioral, longislandbehavioral.com.
All right, Regine, so lovely.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.